Russian officials are triumphant in the wake of the results of the most recent presidential election. According to Pravda, Igor Shilyoy, the first vice premier of the Russian government, hopes that the voting results in the U.S. would show a favorable influence on the economic situation in the world. The first reaction on the stock market shows that there is a hope, the official said. The leader of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, Gennady Zyuganov, had this to say about the new president-elect. He does not have answers to many vital questions yet, although he stated in many of his speeches that he would change the previous political course, which is highly important. All Republican presidents have always defended national interests, including the interests of other countries of the world. The new U.S. president cannot but understand that it is impossible to seek and find answers to many global issues without the participation of such a great country as Russia. And lest you think it was only the commies in Russia who were excited, the leader of the Liberal and Democratic Party of Russia, Vladimir Zhirinovsky, had this to say. There is no point to expect any worsening in the relations. There will only be improvement achieved on all aspects. And finally, on the official side, Russia's ambassador to NATO, Dmitry Rogozin, added this about the results of the recent U.S. election. It will contribute to the improvement of relations between Russia and the alliance, and to the removal of those irresponsible prohibitions for cooperation, which the previous administration had set. Trump is a phenomenon which requires analysis and understanding on the part of Russian politicians. So there you go. Definitive proof that the Kremlin was openly pulling for the winner of the election. That's according to this article from Pravda, which was published in the immediate aftermath of the election in early November 2008. Wait, 2008? This article's talking about Obama? But does that mean that Obama's a Russian patsy? Oh no! How'd you like my Russian accent there? It's good, no? Okay, but seriously, there's no evidence that Obama is a Russian patsy that I know of. It would explain a lot, but there's no evidence for it. However, if you believe the most recent report from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, then there is substantial evidence that the Kremlin really did promote a propaganda campaign to attempt to undermine Hillary Clinton's legitimacy as both a candidate and a president. Now, this report is the unclassified version. According to the document, the official version is a quote-unquote highly classified assessment. According to the Washington Post, the official version is over 50 pages long, while the declassified version available to the public is only 25 pages long. I'm going to talk about what the declassified version actually says, why it doesn't prove anything by itself, and why it does prove that Russia's involvement in the U.S. political process is probably not something that Democrats should make an issue of. So first of all, the report itself. Now, I don't know anything about the intelligence community, so if there's something to be gained by reading between the lines, I don't know what it might be. I'm just going to take it at face value. Let's first look at the report's key findings. The report summarizes itself under its key judgment section. These are the conclusions that it has come to. First, Russian efforts to influence the 2016 U.S. presidential election represent the most recent expression of Moscow's long-standing desire to undermine the U.S.-led liberal democratic order. But these activities demonstrated a significant escalation in directness, level of activity, and scope of effort compared to previous operations. Second, we assess Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered an influence campaign in 2016 aimed at the U.S. presidential election. Russia's goals were to undermine public faith in the U.S. democratic process, denigrate Secretary Clinton, and harm her electability and potential presidency. We further assess Putin and the Russian government developed a clear preference for President-elect Trump. Third, Moscow's influence campaign followed a Russian messaging strategy that blends covert intelligence operations, such as cyber activity, with overt efforts by Russian government state agencies, state-funded media, third-party intermediaries, and paid social media users or, quote, trolls. And lastly, We assess Moscow will apply lessons learned from its Putin-ordered campaign aimed at the U.S. presidential election to further influence events worldwide, including against U.S. allies and their presidential election processes. So let's look at some of these in detail. As to the report's claims that Russia influenced the campaign in order to undermine the U.S.-led liberal democratic order, it offers this as evidence. We assess Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered an influence campaign in 2016 aimed at the U.S. presidential election. Russia's goals were to undermine public faith in the U.S. democratic process, denigrate Secretary Clinton, and harm her electability and potential presidency. We further assess Putin and the Russian government developed a clear preference for presidential-elect Trump. We have high confidence in these judgments. It furthermore states that Putin and the Russian government aspired to help President-elect Trump's election chances when possible by discrediting Secretary Clinton and publicly contrasting her unfavorably to him. All three agencies agree with this judgment. The CIA and FBI have high confidence in this judgment. NSA has moderate confidence. The writers of the report go on to say that Putin held a grudge against Clinton and blamed her for what he saw as inciting protests against him domestically and undermining Russia's interests. As for how the Russians went on to accomplish this propaganda, the report lists several avenues, including hackers, sympathetic news media, and trolls. The report claims that Russia used hackers as proxies for its intelligence service. We assess with high confidence that the GRU used the Guccifer 2.0 persona, DCLeaks.com, and WikiLeaks.com to release U.S. victim data obtained in cyber operations publicly and in exclusives to media outlets. As for the news media, the report claims that the news organization RT, which will later be insinuated to be a propaganda outlet for the Russian government, provided coverage of the U.S. elections that was, quote, extremely negative, and focused on her leaked emails and accused her of corruption, poor physical health and mental health, and ties to Islamic extremism, by which they mean Hillary Clinton, of course. Finally, as regards the mechanism of Russian interference, the report claims that, quote, paid social media users, or trolls, amplified stories on scandals about Secretary Clinton and the role of WikiLeaks in the election campaign. As for whether or not Russia worked to engineer the vote on Election Day, the report has this to say. Russian intelligence accessed elements of multiple state or local electoral boards. Since early 2014, Russian intelligence has researched U.S. electoral processes and related technology and equipment. However, the Department of Homeland Security assesses that the types of systems we observed Russian actors targeting or compromising are not involved in vote tallying. Now, you may be wondering how the authors of this report back up these claims, and the answer is that, well, they don't. This whole section of a 25-page paper, which explains the meat of both why the Russians supposedly favored Trump and how they worked to undermine Hillary Clinton, is only 5 pages long. Now, I fully admit that in the classified report that these claims may be fully substantiated with robust evidence, but in the preface to this report, the authors explain that whenever they say, quote, we assess, what they mean is that based on the preponderance of evidence gathered from multiple sources, including human sources, technical collection, and open source information, and using the applied judgment of both analysts on the ground and officials in the intelligence community, that they believe such and such a thing to be true. Which means, for the purposes of this report, whenever they say that they assess something to be true, which is pretty much the entire piece, that we just have to take their word for it. Now, I am not saying that the men and women who work at the CIA, FBI, and NSA do not know what they're doing, or that they are bad at their jobs. But based on the information provided in this declassified report, there is little reason to believe them over Julian Assange, who continues to maintain that WikiLeaks' source was not Russian, but rather a disgruntled employee at the DNC. Now, Julian Assange, let's be frank, has reason to lie. I mean, at this point, why would he want to make an enemy of Russia by disclosing that it was someone working for the Kremlin? he has no other real friends in the international community at this point except for a bunch of hackers and trolls and such. So why would he want to piss off Russia? But at the same time, the intelligence community is more politicized than American patriots would like to think, and they too have a reason to play up Russian involvement in the supposed interference of the U.S. election process. Now, the Washington Post has a piece out that plays up the importance of the classified report, which is apparently making its way around official circles in Washington. And it's talking about it as if it's the final word on Russian involvement in the election. If it's anything like this report, it's really hard to see how that could be true. And they, in fact, wrote this article before the declassified report came out. And frankly, after having read the declassified report, if I were them, or if I were any person sympathetic to the DNC, I would not be so quick to promote it. You see, while the meat of the paper, it takes up 5 pages of 25, Annex A takes up 6 pages. And Annex A goes into detail about how RT, which is a online news organization that they say gets its funding from a nonprofit, which is probably funded by the Russian government. And it goes on to say how the founders of this news organization, that they are pretty okay with pushing propaganda by the Russian government. The report goes into detail about how they have tried and apparently succeeded, because as of making this video, they have over 2 million subscribers on YouTube and allegedly over 4 billion views. And it describes how they have tried to reach out to a large audience outside of Russia to undermine American interests at home and abroad. Now, what sorts of things has it said to undermine American interests, you may ask? Well, these are the kinds of things that it has promoted during its existence, going back to at least Obama's first term. It has promoted Occupy Wall Street, a movement which RT aired multiple segments about in order to highlight the U.S. economy is fundamentally unfair. It's given pieces on the Diebold conspiracy theory. Back in 2012, there was a minor panic among some on the left about how Mitt Romney supposedly had ties to the Diebold voting machines that were being used in a lot of local election districts. So how could the election be fair if Mitt Romney had supposedly a financial interest in these machines? In other words, the Russian propaganda arm was trying to undermine the 2012 election in favor of Obama, but you didn't hear about it back then. It runs a lot of pieces characterizing the U.S. as a surveillance state. It has run pieces against fracking, which is the mining of natural gas. And Russia's economy is mostly dependent on exporting crude oil, and America's natural gas industry undermines that, and more generally just opposing U.S. intervention in foreign conflicts. Whatever you happen to think about any of these issues, the report by the intelligence community is saying that Russia has done what it could to promote these causes in an effort to undermine the U.S. domestically and abroad. Now, you'll notice that all of these causes are ones that leftists are more likely to promote. Yet we never heard anything about Russia trying to interfere in the U.S. political process then. In 2012, President Obama brought up the fact that Romney had named Russia as our greatest geopolitical foe and had this to say.
A few months ago, when you were asked what's the biggest geopolitical threat facing America, you said Russia. Not Al-Qaeda, you said Russia. In the 1980s are now calling to ask for their foreign policy back.
And the thing is, this is nothing new. For decades now, we on the right have been saying that the Soviets infiltrated American culture and actively thought to undermine it. And for this, we were called conspiracy theorists and paranoid and even Nazis. Now, the modern-day Russian Federation is not to blame for the past actions of the Soviet Union, but there is substantial evidence to show that Soviet sympathizers and their patsies populated positions of influence in the State Department, Hollywood, the Civil Rights Movement, academia, the labor unions, and many other important movements and institutions of our society back during the Cold War. And yet, we've always been told to just scoff at this, that this was a Red Scare, it was a witch hunt, there was nothing to it. But now, The Democrats are engaged in a modern-day witch hunt where the Russians are entirely responsible for the election of Trump. It wasn't people voting based on the economy, based on our political situation, based on the state of our culture. No, it's this Red Scare is real, but all the other ones were fake. I mean, where was the outcry before? Where was the outcry from the Obama administration when the Russians were actively shilling for him? Where was the outcry before when Russia meddled in our affairs and asserted its power over regional players and undermined our foreign policy? I mean, if Russia really is as dangerous and hostile as the Democrats are now telling us, then they didn't get that way overnight. If the Obama administration had done more to protect U.S. interests, then this may not have happened. So forgive me if I fail to see this as anything other than the Democrats' own fecklessness coming back to haunt them. Personally, I think the intelligence community is telling the truth. I think that Russia probably did wage a propaganda campaign to undermine Hillary and that they used trolls and hackers to do it. But the thing is, so what? No one disputes that the information that came out is true. No one disputes that Hillary had numerous significant failings as a political figure. Plus, it's not like we haven't meddled in other countries' democratic process before. This is what happens when the U.S. tries to abandon its role as guarantor of global peace and order. Someone fills in the gap. Hopefully, an economically strong, culturally confident United States can better weather attempts by foreign players to co-opt its political prominence and discourse. Hopefully, the incoming president will be able to make America, well, you know.